My first exposure of, God, I guess it was called at the time, was around 5 years old when my father read the Old Testament. And he liked playing God. And so the voice and all that, I kind of got the sense that, he was living through those thoughts. And God was a bit scary. And, in the Old Testament, there are stories of, I forget who it was. Was it Abraham or Isaac or whatever? But, there's some dad that is informed by God, by the big dad. The big dad informs the little dad, take your son up and prepare to cut your son in half. And the little dad, Isaac or whatever it was, said, okay, God, I will cut my son in half to show my loyalty to you. And he's just getting ready to chop his child in half. And then God says, okay, you've proved your loyalty. So you don't have to carry through killing your child. And that kind of epitomizes so much of the Old Testament. Because that seems to be the contract between son and father. Father, is the miserable sociopathic son of a bitch who's going to ask you to do something that is not in your best interest, and you, out of fear of being punished, of dying, of being shamed and hated, is going to do it. And if you hurt yourself enough out of loyalty to dad, maybe he'll be nice to you and say, okay, you're my son, you belong, because you're willing to do this. And, and so that's kind of God's gang. God's gang consists of parents who are willing to murder their children if asked. And if they will show, absolute loyalty to God's sociopathic tendencies, then they can be part of God's gang. Otherwise, they will be burned in a lake of fire for all eternity. And so this kind of is a lot of the flavor. So it doesn't inspire great hope or admiration or anything. It's kind of like, I should be feeling something. This is not something I particularly want to be involved in. There's a sense of dominance, and unease, like of being seen, because God's looking all the time. This is the other kind of guilt trip parents rely on. And then, with this whole message about being bad and having the transference of the shadow and of aggression and shame from the parent to the child, there's this sense that I'll be found out and punished and that I'm unlovable. And this, I think, hurt and affected and shaped much more than I would rationally like to acknowledge. And I remember when I came across the channel Lazarus at age 13 while at the Findhorn community. There was some fear, because this was obviously not Christian, because in addition to being sadistic, God was possessive in Christian terms. And so if you believed in any other god or talked to any other deity, then you were to be punished for that as well. And Lazarus wasn't saying, that they had anything to do with God. So this is kind of a potential false idol, so to speak. And so there was this sense, okay, I'm clearly violating some aspects of Christianity. And within the spectrum, which is somewhat irritating and confusing, that they don't sit you down and help you decide. Is it the Old Testament? Is it the New Testament? Is it this part of the Bible, that part of the Bible? Is it Jesus? There's just this broad spectrum from helpfulness and forgiveness to absolute brutality and cruelty. And when parents want to scare you, they lean into the cruelty and the sadistic aspects of God. And when they want to have you accommodate their own cruelty, they remind you to forgive them and and to be loving and do what you're told to your parents and all that. And so it's very convenient because with the range going from total love to an acceptance and forgiveness, and even, I had a Catholic girlfriend who, did a number of un-Catholic things, including having an abortion, and she said, well, it doesn't matter because I have asked for forgiveness in Jesus' name. And so you can basically, sin all you want and then be relieved from the sin, which at least there's a relief in the Catholic terminology. If you're going to invent a whole bunch of sins and then saddle those on human beings with the fear of death in them, at least give them an out. And not surprisingly, the institution of the church has given them an out that involves donating to the church and feeling guilty and telling the church all your horrible secrets. Now, I stepped out of the Christian faith, so to speak, which was a fear-based relationship, by reframing God as a son of a bitch. In other words, within the spectrum of the Bible, there was a version of God that would throw me in a lake of fire, that would bully me, that would shout at me, that would tell me to kill my own children, that, would do all these sadistic, horrible things, and that was God. And the reframing was, that's subhuman. And the way that I looked at it was, would I behave that way if I was God? Would I burn you in a lake of fire if you didn't do what I told you to do? Would I ask you to cut your child in half in order to prove that you were a loyal friend? Would I ask you not to have any other friends because I was the only one? And if you had other friends, I would smote you or whatever. Would I do any of that stuff? And I said, no, I wouldn't do that. Because that's cruel. Because that's mean. Because that's sadistic. Because even if I kind of went through the analogy and I thought, let's say you've slept with my wife, you've tormented my children and all that. And I'm really, really, really hurt and pissed and all that. Might I throw you into a lake of fire? Sure. That seems possible. How long would I leave you in the lake of fire? How much pain and suffering? Because usually when we want to hurt someone, usually it's because they've hurt us, or at least someone has, one, and we're stuck there. And we feel alone in the stuck hurt, meaning we're hurt, we're stuck in the hurt, we feel alone in the hurt, and we experience sociopathic dissociation, a lack of empathy and help from people around us, particularly those that hurt us. If all those four conditions are met, one of then first of all, the conditions of a sick culture are met. So if you hurt me and I get stuck in that hurt and I can't get out and you will not empathize with me and help, then you are sick. Meaning that's not how healthy human beings behave. You've dissociated from a part of the larger structure. In that sense, if you look at the pattern of human cells within the larger body of the species, you have a sick body. If one part of the body is attacking the other part of the body, 1. 2, the other part of the body is getting stuck, and then 3, you're not helping it come back into flow and well-being. You've now got a sick sense of self. You've got a sick body where one part is attacking the other part. That's called cancer. And this is not a good body. And of course, when cancer kills a human being, the cancer dies shortly after because the cancer grows rapidly by an explosion of cell reproduction. But once it's killed its host, it dies as well. So it's not really a great success for the cancer to, hooray, hooray, we've killed the host body, now we're dead as well. I mean, it's not a sustainable pattern. And so I looked at, so what's wrong in that dynamic is the sociopathic disconnection. And revenge or hurting someone else to let them know what it feels like to be in that amount of pain is one of the ways that we break through the cycle of numbness. In that sense, one could say that revenge or transferring some of our pain to those around us who are not responding or helping us out of the pain is actually a function of evolution. And so, yes, so maybe I'll throw you in a lake of fire so that you know what it feels like to have your daughter raped in front of you and killed and, hot coals shoved down her throat and stuff. And, and there's this innocent little girl that didn't harm you at all. And so you're gonna know what that feels. But once the hurt and pain that can't be transformed on its own is transferred to the abuser, etc., and there's a shared pain, there's often a deep bond and there's a release. There is not a sociopathic disconnect for all eternity. And that's one of the reasons why, in fist fights, where like two guys, one guy sleeps with his best friend, they have a fight and they wrestle each other and they get it all out. At some point, that violence will move into tears, will move into, to hurt and to grief, and how could you do this and that? And you can actually heal a relationship if you will thoroughly express and embody all the pain and make it a shared pain where both of you are dealing with it. This is actually a way back to health, to reintegrate the system, to where one part of the body doesn't attack another part of the body and pretend that it's a separate body. It's not. When you undermine part of your own species, it's cruel. It's not healthy. It's coming from a sociopathic illusion of separation of an integrated whole. And so I realized that even if I would torment someone who had hurt me and made me feel helpless and small, even if I had godlike powers and I threw them into a lake of fire, I'd probably take them out within 5 minutes, maybe an hour. So you'll be in a lake of fire for an hour. That's enough time for you to totally get how absolutely, small and hurt, etc., that I felt. It just wouldn't be fun to hold on for eternity. And the conclusion I had from this was that I, as a 13-year-old boy, had a superior moral compass to the Christian God of the Old Testament. And then the question becomes, if God is more subhuman than a 13-year-old boy, he is also more subhuman, more of a jerk, etc., than many, many human beings, because I'm not the nicest human being on the planet. So if God is much worse than any number of human beings on the planet, the question is, why is that being called God? Why isn't it being called a subhuman jerk? And then you come into the fear of the bully. Well, because the church is emphasizing the fear of God. Well, certainly if you've got a bully, the more bullying-ish the bully is, then sure, you would have a lot of fear of the bully, and so you might not want to talk back to the bully if you understood that the bully and their gang had the biggest, we're going to hurt you, basically, for standing up to the bully. So what I reframed and said that there may be a bully that the Christians call God, who may have the ability and the sadistic cruelty to put me in a lake of fire for all eternity. But let's call a spade a spade. That's a bully who is a way worse bully than any human being I've met. So in other words, you could really call that a demon, a devil, this is a powerful being, if they exist, that is worse than human beings. So an abusive jerk of a bully, etc. So then that now, let's stop calling this God. So the question is, am I willing to face the bully? And I thought, well, first of all, you don't know that the bully exists, number one. Number two, if they do exist, human bullies exist, are they the only people? No, there's plenty of nice people too. So if the bully exists, in the entire field of the multiverse, there are almost certainly other beautiful and powerful beings that are nice, that are much more than the bully. That just stands to reason. There's not that many human bullies. It's often just 5 bullies in a school will terrorize an entire school, but there's hundreds of kids. 5 bullies, 10 bullies. It's a 5% minority. So let's say there's hundreds of of demons posing as Christian gods. There may be millions of beautiful deities and friends and all of that. And the question then becomes, do I want to live in fear of bullying and choose my thoughts, my beliefs, who I spend time with, out of fear of being punished by a bully passing for a god under the delusions of Christianity? And the answer was no. I'm willing to risk it because life's not worth living. I'd just as soon die and be obliterated rather than be in some bully's gang out of fear of being bullied. That's no life to live here, and it's no afterlife either. Because sitting around listening to harps plucking along and people with wings flying around, because you did the bully's bidding, isn't much of a life either, and so that's kind of just the sense that. And so I decided to work with Lazarus. Now, the combination of my own thinking and Lazarus led to an awareness that reality is really, really big, which led to the awareness that there was no capacity for my brain to understand or perceive how big reality was, which then leads to the obvious conclusion that any sense of the ultimate reality is a form of hubris, because it's suggesting that reality is smaller than my imagination. And my imagination is very, very tiny. There is so much that I don't have the imagination to imagine. And so, by definition, then, reality is as big as anything I can possibly imagine. So if I can imagine it, it's that, and 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 it's that. It's much bigger. And it's way bigger than that. And then the idea is that, so what, when we think of God as the ultimate, the ultimate expression of one's ideals, because that's really what a god or a goddess is, it's a masculine or feminine expression of our ideals. For example, we wouldn't say that that being inept, stupid, cruel, clumsy, unbalanced, that's God, because that's not our ideals. Our ideals are about excellence and wealth and pleasure and beauty and wonders and intelligence and knowledge. Whatever it is that we value, that's what we project out as ideals, and that's what we tend to bow to as deities. And so, if the ultimate deity is way beyond human imagination, way beyond human thought, then the question is, what am I relating to? And the answer is, I'm relating to the biggest deity that I'm capable of imagining. So the deity is not limited by the deity, it's limited by my ability to imagine it. And and I'm relating to what I can imagine, because otherwise there's no feeling. If I can't have any language around it, then I don't have any thought around it. If I don't have any thought around it, I don't have any feeling around it. If I don't have any thoughts and feelings, I can't imagine anything, and it's not real to me. It's real in the abstract, but it's not real to me. And so, so that's been my definition of a deity. The deity is the most beautiful, wonderful, magnificent thing that I can possibly imagine. And then it's much bigger than that. But that's my placeholder. And that's not the only deity. There's many versions of that. There's 5 billion versions of that. Every human being has a slightly different imagination in that terrain. And so, thus opened my doorway to, multiple channels, multiple prayers, different visions, etc. Understanding that everyone who's talking about God, or goddess, or god, goddess, all that is talking about the version of exaltation, the version of growth or of idealization that they relate to and that they can imagine. And so, a culture that's that worships speed, for example, would probably, focus on how fast and how excellent in speed the deity was, etc. Just like you find that with teenagers. If teenagers have, like NASCAR, fast racing, then they always worship the one that goes the fastest because their deity is speed. And so whoever the human being is that goes the fastest, that's their hero. And so, whatever our deities are, the gods and goddesses, if you're a business person, Ganesh has a lot to do with money and abundance. And so, Ganesh becomes interesting because you value money, and Ganesh is associated with abundance and money. And so Ganesh becomes important because you value money. If you're a peaceful person that values, centeredness and this and that, then you value Buddha because Buddha embodied that. So we look to our mythologies and create our mythologies in renditions that exalt and exonerate our personal values in idealized form. Now, this did not encourage a great intimacy. In my teenage years, I adopted Lazarus's idea that the higher self was kind of the intermediary, that the higher self was already bigger than any human being could imagine. So we're not talking God, Goddess, all that is. We're talking just the higher self of an individual, with all, bigger than the subconscious, bigger than the unconscious, bigger, the higher self, bigger than all the lifetimes combined. That's the higher self. And that in and of itself is hard enough to relate to because it's much bigger than an individual human ego. One can personify and project onto the higher self the idea that they're just like me and put them in a body. But of course, if they contain, tens of thousands of lifetimes and non-physical parts and this and that and whatever it is, they're way, way bigger than we can imagine. And their relationship and purpose is bigger but so it's a step-down version. And so that's kind of the closest thing that I've related to. And I felt some realness to it. But I also felt a lot of hesitation, fear of being ungrounded, because as I was discovering metaphysics and creating our own reality and things like that, my parents were getting a divorce. My siblings and I were being tormented. The school system was in many ways betraying us by, insisting on a whole host of subjects that have nothing to do with life, and taking us out of all the activities that would actually prepare us for life. I mean, they don't teach you how to build a house in school. They don't teach you how to drive in school. They don't teach you how to cook in school. They don't teach you how to have a romantic relationship. They don't teach you how to heal the past. Anything useful, basically, it's wiped off the slate. And on the pretense of teaching you how to think, you're told to shut up and learn all these things that, to a large extent, are completely useless in an inadequate fashion. And so this is, very suspect. And in that framework, I did some higher self meditation, but the idea that I was creating all of this with my beliefs, and, it just got worse and worse. I would do meditations and things, and then, my parents were closer to divorce and fighting even more and hurting us even more. That just felt really, really painful. And so, I had a lot of hedging going on there where it's like, screw this. I've got to figure out life skills and, how to get through and how to, not piss off other people to an extent that they wouldn't help me, in this. And it was just very scary and uncomfortable. And I didn't know how to reconcile that trauma with a growing spirituality. And so I distanced myself somewhat, in part because I didn't want to feel betrayed by a spirituality. If I'd ask my higher self to help me, help my parents not get a divorce or whatever it was, I didn't want to feel like they weren't real and they didn't care about me because the abuse just continued. And so it felt really painful and it was a very stuck, and painful place. And there's some anger and some fear and some loneliness around Lazarus, who kept saying that he was, my friend and talking to me, but, it was a friendship based on money in part, because Lazarus says, I'm your friend, I'm not your teacher, I'm not your guru, but you have to buy our friendship. You have to buy my cassettes. And they're talking about things that aren't really relevant in your life. And you're telling me that if I do this technique and it doesn't work, then I didn't want it to work. You're not telling me that your technique was fucked up. You're telling me that I'm doing it wrong. And my life is going into hell as a teenager doing these techniques and stuff. And the whole thing just felt really, really scary, particularly, with all the taboo, around the Jack and Lazarus community and stuff. And, they don't like hearing any anger or questions of Lazarus. And so the whole thing just felt, scary and taboo. And so I think a lot of my distance around that, I didn't know how to deal with it. And my biggest fear was getting kind of deep into the esoterics of spirituality and having my life go to absolute hell and have people saying somewhat realistically, like, what the fuck are you doing with this metaphysics? You need to take care of your life. Stop talking about creating your own reality and stuff like that. Go get a job, do this. And it was quite difficult. I was in Canada without my father let my student visa expire, and I didn't have a work permit, and I desperately wanted to leave the home, but I'm in a country that I'm illegal in, and I'm a minor. I was 17 when I left home and moved in with a friend. This is, it's not like I can say, well, let's just get rid of these parents and create new and wonderful parents. It was very frustrating. And I cut back on meditation and things because of that reason. It just felt very, very painful. And it felt like it could just get way bigger than I could deal with. And so I just I stopped doing spiritual techniques, because I didn't want to feel betrayed by God, by Goddess, by Lazarus, as well as my parents and teachers and my culture and all of that. This was sad, and it was, a little bit delicate. I also learned that the technique of strategy worked very well, that I have a good analytical mind. And if I just ignored all this thing and looked at reality practically, I built my first custom home at age 23, on time and on budget. Loved it, did the whole thing very easily and wonderfully, because I didn't do meditations, I didn't program, I didn't process, I didn't work on my beliefs. I just figured out the system and did it. And it's like, now no one's betraying me. If I'd done visualizations and then it didn't happen, I could feel betrayed by Lazarus. But this way, it kind of took Lazarus off the hook. It took my unseen friends and all that off the hook, because I wasn't asking them for help. So if it didn't work out, it was just me, and I didn't have to feel, betrayed and confused, about that. And so that thrust continued. And took me ultimately away from Lazarus, and channeled work, because it's like, what the fuck? You could, if you listen to 1,000 hours of Lazarus material, which I did, I could literally do techniques from dawn to dusk. I could do techniques 24/7 and still not keep up with all the techniques. 1. 2, it was almost certain, from my experience and just the rationality, that if I was spending 10 hours a day doing metaphysical techniques, that my life would be falling apart, because I wouldn't be doing things. And then it was also very obvious to me, as I got very good at achieving goals, that if I simply made yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, and daily goals and did them, I would achieve tons of stuff without a single meditation, which I did. My productivity went through the roof without a single meditation, without processing, without working on my beliefs, without praying to God, without talking with my higher self, without worrying about philosophy. Just saying, I want this. What's my list of ways that I can increase my likelihood of creating that? Let me do all of those things until I create it and check that off my list. And so that became, just felt way safer and grounded and saner, particularly as I would meet some of Lazarus' friends. Like I had a friend who was busy meditating. I was busy making money and growing my business. He was busy meditating about wanting to be rich and investing in commodities. And 80% of people who invest in commodities futures lose money. And of course, he was one of the 80%. And so here he's busily using Lazarus's techniques to lose lots of money. And I'm saying, fuck all that, just study business, do this and this, and make some money. And he wouldn't do it, so he kept losing money. And I felt quite angry at Lazarus. Like, you call these people your friends? You charge them constantly money. This guy has credit card debt. He's poor. He's wasting the little money he has on commodities, and you call that a friendship, and you don't even tell your friend what an idiot he's doing to listen to your techniques. I mean, this isn't a friendship. This is betrayal. This is, buffoonery. How humiliated is he going to feel at some point? This is sick. That's not how I treat my friends. I want them to do things that work. And, so that whole thing, it just felt very dicey. And so I created more and more things that worked until ultimately I had an external reality that I could not hope to be much better. And I really didn't know if my life would get any better on the outside or that it would matter. I was eating the best food in the world. I was cooking as much as I wanted. I would travel as much as I wanted. I could go anywhere I wanted. I had my house to myself. It was fine. I had no debt. I had, this is a great life. But I felt suicidal as the pain of unresolved childhood trauma caught up with me. It's like that phenomenon of when you race forward in a motorboat and then you kill the engine because you've arrived, and then the eddy in the back catches up and sometimes swamps and spills into the boat. And I had arrived. I had everything in terms of physical material stuff that I could possibly need and then some. So it didn't make sense to go slaving away. I didn't believe in insatiable materialism. I don't want 200 pairs of shoes. So by the time I've got 6 pairs of good wearable shoes, I don't need any more shoes. By the time my cupboard is filled with my favorite turtleneck, I don't need any more, I can't eat more food. I don't need a bigger house. And so what's there as this pain of childhood, as this trauma of childhood catches up, and I realize that it's a lie. That all the money, all the investing, all the this, all of that doesn't heal the grief and pain of not being able to have the kind of relationship with self and with others that, and my own body, that feels healing and positive. Almost all of my pain was in my relationship with human beings. The relationship between my own body, my own fears, and myself, my awareness, the relationship between myself and the culture. And there's 10 different levels of that. But it's every level imaginable. I mean, it's the education system. It is the real estate system. It's the fact that on my neighborhood block alone, statistically, 70% of the people are going to have chronic feelings of loneliness, are going to feel isolated, are not going to feel deeply understood, but are at the same time not going to engage with their neighbors in a way that's going to do anything about that. That's going to remain a chronic state. When I reached out to all of my neighbors sending a letter and dropping it in their mailbox, no one responded. When I knocked on the doors of early, neighbors right around, some were suspicious, etc. And, it strikes me that when you have fear and suspicion and antagonism of people that do healthy things, but you think it's normal to do unhealthy things, being isolated and not knowing and not being known is unhealthy. And when that's normal and doing something about it is viewed with suspicion, you've got a reward system, a punishment and reward system that perpetuates the negative while punishing the positive. That's never going to change the culture, because I don't take it personally that neighbors respond this way. That's what creates a chronically lonely and isolated culture. So surprise, surprise, we have one. But it's not easy to imagine that changing anytime soon, as long as that's, the case. And there's just so many layers of this that just felt sad, where no amount of money and no amount of me figuring out or building a different house or wearing different shoes, all things that are very easy in America. You can buy just about anything you want and have it delivered to your door in America very easily. It's a great country for that. But what if I want to hug at 2 a.m? What would I have to do in America to legitimately get a hug at 2 a.m? Are there 24-hour hug stores? Are there smile stores? Are there go and tell jokes with a stranger stores? Are there let's talk about our deepest feelings at 4 a.m. stores? These are your useful stores. These are real issues that people's biochemistry is off because of not enough touch and hugs. They don't need pharmaceuticals with an endless degree of side effects. They need to be able to have hourly hugs, not hourly Percocets. And yet you can't go anywhere to get an hourly hug. This is outrageous. I would change it in a heartbeat. I would say, okay, in any city, we've got to have, at least 5 24/7 open social health facilitation clinics where you go to get hugs, you go to talk, you go to meet other human beings, you go to relieve guilt and depression, you go to dance and move. And that, this is just it's so cheap. And it's an absolute nightmare to me that instead we're saddled with neighbors who get angry and suspicious that you come and knock on their doors to have human connection. And that's something I realized I couldn't change, which I tried in a whole host of different ways, and that felt very, painful, depressing, frustrating. It's like, give me a break. Do we really need to be this committed to maintaining this amount of chronic pain? And so that's where I began to run into, the limitations of strategy. Because if you want more work, it's easy. You just advertise more, and this country will give you money as much as you want, basically, and that's easy. And they'll all cooperate to get more money themselves, but they won't all cooperate to feel happier. They won't all cooperate to be more intimate. They won't all cooperate to be more intelligent. They'll cooperate to make more money in conventional channels, which is exactly what the country doesn't need. It doesn't need more money in conventional channels. It needs more aliveness. It needs more creativity. It needs more self and other appreciation. It needs more depth of emotion and emotional literacy. But you can't get it anywhere. And even going to a therapist, there's a certain sense of pathology. Like you go when something's wrong, as opposed to go and talk to someone because that's what human beings have done for thousands of years, is they've told the truth in a meaningful way. Only for most of those thousands of years, they haven't had to pay a stranger to do it. They've just told people because that's what human beings do. So this, became very frustrating and very painful, and led to a sense of suicide and frustration and anger, ultimately a certain amount of self-destructiveness and hostility. And I really didn't know how to break that cycle. And so, the pain, the hurt, and all that got worse and worse. And then I reconnected with Lazarus, out of just sheer desperation, and if it'll help make this pain get less, because I felt like I'd be in these vicious circles where I'd look out and everything was so unsatisfying. I don't want to eat more. I don't want to buy more. I want a substance that isn't here in this cult. And the more I talk about that, the more people alienate me. Because this isn't a cult that acknowledges its need for that substance. This is a cult that calls that weird. Because this is a weird cult. When you're in a weird cult, then doing healthy things are said to be weird. And then weird itself is just a bizarre thing. I mean, people are satisfied to avoid weirdness. Weirdness, in technical terms, means different from the cult. And if you're in a sick cult, then the more different you are from the cult, the better, as a general rule. And so this, we don't even have people who can make the distinction between healthy difference and unhealthy difference from the cult. And so I had been deeply hurt by a therapist who betrayed any number of trusts and therapeutic ethics and all that to escalate a romantic relationship under the influence of psychedelics. This had left me in severe PTSD because of the abandonment and betrayal that came on the other side of that. And I just couldn't trust human beings. Human beings were incredibly unsatisfying in this culture. And of course, people don't enjoy hearing that and take it personally. I don't take it personally at all. It's a cult dynamic. If you're raised in a cult that doesn't think, if you're raised in a cult that shames and challenges you for doing something intelligent and different, if the norm is incredibly destructive, statistically speaking, you're going to have an unsatisfying cult of unsatisfied human beings, which is what we are. If you say how many Americans are frustrated with their jobs, how many Americans are satisfied with their body, how many Americans like their country, it is a dismal statistic. And the problem is not the people. They're born fine. The problem is the cult, self-perpetuating pattern of values and engagement. And so I began, I asked myself, could I break out of this spiral of hurt, anger, rage, hate, bitterness, cynicism, exhaustion, depression, then anger that I'm feeling all that, then being punished for talking about that, and it just goes round and round. And I could not see a way to do it. Because it would take a healthy and intelligent cult to recognize its own disease and respond to it in the interest of its people. We don't have such a cult. So I found myself turning to crystals, to energy, to unseen friends, and ultimately back to a sense of deity, a sense of divine, sacred spirituality, a sense of higher self. And that was the only substance that could answer that degree of suffering and pain. And it really does answer the conundrum in a very technical way, because part of the metaphysics is understanding, as Plato did, that the non-physical world is far more dimensional than the physical world. The physical world has 4 dimensions. It's very narrow. It's very dry in many ways. There's an incredible amount of mediocrity in the human domain, and never is that more true than in relational dimensions. The amount of mediocrity and sheer lethargy that it takes for a cult to reduce its social interactions from billions of possibilities to let's get a bite to eat something to make us fat, let's go for a walk, let's watch a movie, and let's text. And that's it. Billions of possibilities reduced to 4, or let's go get a drink and go to a party to listen to loud sounds and shout and try and talk over the music. It is a bizarre repertoire of incredibly inept, minimalistic, narrow-dimensional exchanges that do not explore the full range of emotional depth or mental, stretch the mind much, and it is just incredibly depressing that so many people are satisfied with that because they haven't thought of anything else. Anyway, it's very bizarre, and then they're worried about breaking this. Like, what about doing some eye gazing? Oh, that's weird. So what? What about some eye gazing? Well, I've never done that before. So you're just, what would you like to do? Oh, you'd like to eat some more, would you? How original. Wow. It's like, is there anything new you're willing to try? And it's just so disappointing. And then people will take that personally. Like, I don't care who you are. Expand your repertoire of activities over 10 items. And hitting a ball back or forth is not necessarily, divine salvation instead of just getting a bite. Let's hit a ball back and forth and then get a bite. It's incredibly boring. And so the inner world has transformed that to understand at a very deep level that that's more real than this. That when the body falls away, that who we truly are, what we think, what we feel, what we imagine, is what's real. That's heavenly. That's exciting to prepare for a more dynamic life after death by connecting in more meaningful ways. I cannot find Americans who respond intelligently and empathetically to sexual abuse, trauma, and shame and PTSD. I haven't met one who responds intelligently to that. That's not a personal criticism to the people I've met. It's a cultural phenomenon. But I have found plenty of energy, plenty of beings that respond perfectly to that state with tremendously healing energy and affirmation of the innate value in every human being, including me. When I go down to Safeway, I don't get that message. When I go to my therapist, I don't get that message. When I go to, it's all a shopping list in America, buy a bowling experience, buy food, buy this, buy makeup, buy art supply. It's, wherever I go to buy something in America, which is the common, medium of exchange, is the phenomena of purchasing something. That's basically what social interactions are reduced to most of the time. Or if you're not buying something, then you're going to sell something. So today, my interaction with human beings was selling a contract, and interacting with my wife, where we have a sane relationship that's about us, is the only other, intelligent social interaction. So we bought food, and we sold a contract, and then we connected, together. That's the sanity. And yet, these deep healings on the inside, these deep connections and relationships are the only thing that really brings joy and meaning to a point where it's like that, that vacancy, that hollow emptiness feels filled. Now, I relate it to like my personal deifications: beauty, truth, and goodness, Platonic values, grace, the efficiency of being, the excellence of being, the elegance of being, grace. When something is beautiful, true, and good without struggle, then you have grace, you have mastery. When you have a surrender to something transcendent, more beautiful, true, and good than one's personal ideals, etc., when there's surrender, when there's choice, the choice to surrender, the choice to relate to something bigger than ourselves, and participation, partnering. There's these fractal patterns within all aspects of reality where there's just an infinite pattern within a pattern within a pattern within a pattern. The family pattern is reproduced in the individual. The individual pattern is represented in the personas within the individual. So you have the inner personas, which internalize the family dialogue into the individual, which are then mirrored by the family, which are then mirrored by the community, which are then mirrored by the cult, and then to some extent mirrored, within the species. These fractal patterns go on endlessly. So there's a real sense that to partner with the larger pattern of which you are a part, to integrate, to have integrity with, if we're down here, to integrate the self, to integrate our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, to integrate this persona with this persona into a more cohesive and stable whole. To integrate and engage is what it's all about. To experience the joy of being a part of something so much bigger than self. And in a cult that is largely materialistic, that joy is about, opening up to the multidimensionality of reality that is way beyond cult and culture, that's way beyond physicality. And so I truly believe that it is absolutely essential for the species and for each of us as individuals to absolutely learn life mastery skills in the pragmatics of life, etc., and then to reach towards a deeper and deeper sense of that which is beyond us. On a materialistic level, that's caring for other people. I'm involved with a homeless project right now. On a social level, that's caring for other human beings, loving and participating in the growth and development of my wife, as well as myself. On a spiritual level, that's connecting with my own spirit, my own soul, my own subconscious and unconscious mind, my own dreamscape, and participating in the vast ecosphere of consciousness that is beyond and transcendent of physical realms, and being aware. I really like the idea. I'm reading some of the books by the channel Seth right now. I really like the idea, what he says about that everything is a symbol of a symbol of a symbol of a symbol of a symbol. And so you have this constant movement towards source. But ultimately, the real source is unipolar. It's not bipolar. The real source transcends polarity. But we're in a polarized dynamic, and we're looking through very narrow dimensions. So if you can think of, for example, a word, if I say table, there's a certain reality. You know what table means, I know what table means, so table has a reality. But more real than the symbol for table is the word table. But more real than the symbol for table is an actual table. But more real than an actual table is the understanding of the multidimensional energy pattern that the five senses pick up as a table. But to do that is to transcend the physical senses and still stay in the physical terrain. And then bigger than that is the energy that comes into the physical domain that becomes the table. And then bigger than that is the source of the energy that comes into the physical domain as table and then is perceived through the five senses. And so it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So the tiniest narrow thread of reality is the language thinking mind, which we spend most of our time in. We look at TV screens, which are visual representations of table. We hear the sound table, sound representations of table. And it is incredibly thin. There's often no emotion around it, no fluctuations around it. And if you look at a multidimensional object, it is only as big as the observing and measuring devices one uses to look at the object. For example, if you look at a multidimensional object, and the only thing you have is a camera, so the only way you can perceive the multidimensional object is through light showing up in the spectrum capable of being seen by the lens in the camera. Then the entire multidimensional object collapses into the spectrum of light as a symbolic representation of the multidimensional object as it is seen through a camera. And then we look at that, and if all we have is eyes, we say that is the object. But it is not the object. It is a representation of a certain dimension of the object through a certain lens. And if we understand that everything is vibration at some level, then the things that are real to us are things that are solid. And the things that are solid are things that vibrate at a similar frequency to our own. So, for example, if there's a vibrational pattern like this, if I'm here, this vibration is not solid. I pass right through it. Only if I'm on the same vibration is it solid. For example, if someone wants to fight and I don't want to fight, the fight isn't solid. It only becomes solid if I react at the frequency of the fight that makes the fight real, because you need an oppositional force. And usually you can find that if you don't react to someone hurling an insult at you, and then you don't react to someone throwing a drink in your face, you'll probably react to your daughter being raped. I mean, if someone is determined to find a solidness, if they're trying to engage you in some way, but the engagement doesn't really happen until two people meet at a certain frequency, which is why it's a really interesting phenomena. I was doing some constellation therapy, which I've done another subject on that. I was doing constellation therapy with a deity, meaning I asked the constellation therapist to embody the role of a deity. And instantly, all of my reactivity and resistance vanished. And I was at one of the most reactive points of my entire life. Now, when one is highly reactive, there is something in almost any human being to react to. If you're highly impatient, there's always something that's happening too slow. So then you can react to that. If you're highly scared, there's always something that could go wrong, so you react to that. So the more reactive you are, the easier it is to go into an oppositional tension with some part of reality. Now, I was incredibly reactive, but I was asking a deity to come through. The deity had zero reactivity to me. There was nothing to be in tension with. And so suddenly I was in a state of complete health and well-being, because there was nothing there to react to, and there was no reaction to me. There was just presence and acceptance and love, and I was perfectly healthy. Then the therapist goes out of deity and in back into their own personality, and there's all kinds of stuff to react to because, the therapist is too serious and they're too judgmental and they're pushing back and they're determined not to have their boundaries pushed. And suddenly there's all this tension and tussling and stuff because they're reactive and I'm reactive. When you're in a completely neutral environment and no deity worth its salt is attached to anything, then there's no reactivity. And so so you can be completely reactive. It's kind of like if you can imagine yourself flailing around with your hands and this and that way, and there's all these instruments around you that can react, then you're going to hit the chime here and the gong there and the drum there, and there'll be all these dissonant sounds because you're flailing around in, all this energy, and all these sounds are reacting, and they're clashing and this and that. But if you're in a completely neutral room with non-reactive surfaces, you can do all the same flailing and there's complete silence. And then you become conscious of your own stuff. This is me. This isn't the bell making that noise. This is me flailing around, and I can stop at any time. And so, there's an incredible... And this also ties into the dynamic of perspective, where you can say that you're perfect just the way you are. From what perspective, though? I was perfect the way I was in relationship to a deity. I was completely unacceptable in relationship to the therapist because the therapist was reactive, the deity wasn't. And that's human, that's human nature and human limitation. But this is very interesting to understand that all vibrations are out there in one form or another, but that we lock in and engage with the vibrations that we are resonating with, that is our vibration. Because if I'm vibrating like this, and some part or another person is vibrating like this, and we meet, we will be solid to one another because I'm intersecting on the same frequency that they are, at the same vibration. So we're both solid to one another. But if I'm interacting with this frequency, and they're interacting with this frequency, there might be a very slight overlap, but we're not solid to one another. This whole range of vibration can go right through me. It's no issue. Being angry at God, for example, the Christian God, sure, the Christian God is defined by a jealous, reactive son of a bitch, and so you're going to go into conflict, with all kinds of things, commandments and this and that. The highest resonance of beauty, truth, and goodness is just acceptance. There's no reactivity, so there's no conflict. You can't fight with an accepting deity because the deity accepts the fight. So you're not really fighting. There's just a presence and neutral acceptance. And so this... This, I guess to complete the circle, I'm incredibly aware that I cannot move forward in a meaningful way with my own life without engaging in the rich multidimensionality of consciousness and transcendence, and the many possible and probable expressions of beauty, truth, goodness, grace, surrender, choice, participation, excellence, love, kindness, joy, exaltation, energy flow, enthusiasm, that these are the way home. And the way home is the use of choice, and pivoting in the conscious mind from a relationship of rejection, avoidance, denial, fear, to a relationship of participation in the larger body of which we are all a part.